Now, from Washington, D.C., Raymond Arroyo.
A warm welcome to all of you joining us in the United States and the world over. Lots to cover this evening. The persecution of Christians continues in hot spots around the world. Earlier this week, serious anti-Christian violence broke out again in Egypt and in Africa. Here to give us an update on this largely uncovered global phenomenon is Nina Shea. She's co-author of the new book, Persecuted, The Global Assault on Christians. And later, author, Catholic mom, and pundit Rachel Campos Duffy returns. She'll discuss the latest cultural news, including the issue of immigration and assimilation, the sexualization of our kids, and much more. And finally, we'll bring you the story of a true American hero, priest, soldier, and posthumous recipient of the Congressional Medal of Honor earlier today, Father Emil Kapaun. Roy Wenzel, the author of the new book, The Miracle of Father Kapaun, and former POWs and friends of the Padre, Mike Dow and Bob Wood, will join us. As always, I want you to be part of the program. The number, 1-800-221-9460 in the U.S., internationally 205-271-2980, or drop us an email at worldover@ewtn.com. Here's the brief news from the world over this week. The Patriarch of the Coptic Orthodox Church, Pope Tawadros II, is accusing Egyptian President Mohamed Morsi of negligence following deadly sectarian violence last weekend. Initial clashes between the Muslims and Coptic Christians claimed the lives of 4 Christians and 1 Muslim. Then on Sunday, 2 more Christians were killed and 80 injured outside the main Coptic Orthodox Cathedral in Cairo. Emotional and angry mourners were attacked during a procession following the funeral of the 4 Christians killed in earlier clashes. Police fired tear gas at the cathedral to break up the crowd, but did not step in when the procession was attacked. Pope Tawadros II called the attack on the cathedral a flagrant assault on a national symbol, and the Egyptian church has never been subjected to this in 2,000 years, he said. More on this in our next segment. And the humanitarian crisis in Syria continues to grow. More than 300 Christian families have fled Aleppo as rebels seek to take control of the nation's largest city. The refugee families are reporting murders and rapes perpetuated by rebels. Meanwhile, the condition for those remaining in Aleppo is worsening. Chaldean Catholic Bishop Antoine Audo told the Vatican's Fides news agency that people they are becoming exhausted, living day by day. Food is scarce and starvation is beginning to set in. The woman known to friends and foes as the Iron Lady, former British Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher, died from a stroke on Monday. She was 87. Thatcher became the first female Prime Minister of the United Kingdom in 1979 and led the country for 11 years. Longer than anyone in the 20th century. Her free market policies led to a turnabout of the stagnant British economy, and she is credited, along with Ronald Reagan and Pope John Paul II, with hastening the end of the Soviet Union. Prime Minister David Cameron offered his praise for the remarkable Thatcher on Wednesday.
The question is that this House has considered, and came the lady. She made the political weather, she made history. And let this be her epitaph, that she made our country great again. And I commend this motion to the House.
Yeah. Her reign was not without controversy or challenges. Speaking from Belfast, Sinn Féin President Gerry Adams described Thatcher's Ireland policy as a total and absolute failure. Lady Thatcher will be laid to rest on April 17th at a ceremonial funeral with military honors at St. Paul's Cathedral in London. And Vatican spokesman Father Federico Lombardi has denied a report that Pope Emeritus Benedict XVI is near death. A Spanish journalist, Paloma Gomez Borrero, wrote on Tuesday that Benedict's health had, quote, dramatically diminished over the past 15 days. We won't have him for much longer, she wrote, and it is unlikely that the Pope Emeritus will appear again in public. The following day, Father Lombardi insisted that the former pope has no particular illness. Benedict's ailments, he said, are connected to age. Father Lombardi made a virtually identical statement December of 2011, dismissing similar speculation. 2 more countries are a step closer to legalizing gay marriage. In the face of continued protests in France, legalization, creating marriage and adoption rights for same-sex couples passed a key vote in the Senate on Tuesday. It's expected to finalize the legislation in the coming days, setting up a final vote in the National Assembly in May. Socialist President François Hollande has pledged support. And Uruguay's legislature voted to approve gay marriage on Wednesday. Uruguay will likely become the 3rd country in the Americas after Canada and Argentina to grant marriage and adoption rights to gay couples. And horrifying details have been emerging this week in the murder trial of Philadelphia abortionist Kermit Gosnell. Witnesses throughout the week have testified to terrifying conditions and practices within the clinic, including alleged infanticide and late-term abortions. Former clinic workers say they've witnessed screaming babies who were 18 to 24 inches long, whose spines were snipped at the neck after delivery. One witness said women were often given drugs to speed up delivery. The 72-year-old Dr. Gosnell is charged with killing 7 newborns and a woman who died following an abortion. There are also more than 30 other criminal counts. If convicted, Gosnell could face the death penalty. And immigrant activists and labor unions rallied nationwide Wednesday in support of immigration reform. With signs in English and Spanish, handmade and union-issued, thousands of demonstrators appeared in 18 states and here in D.C. They called on Congress to approve legislation granting the 11 million undocumented immigrants a path to citizenship. Meanwhile, the democratically controlled U.S. Senate has officially taken up legislation, or will take up legislation next week. An unfinished, sweeping 1,000-page immigration reform bill will be considered by the Judiciary Committee on Tuesday. Republican committee members are objecting to the hastily scheduled hearing. Senator Mike Lee of Utah said the time frame was completely inadequate for a bill of this magnitude. And the Obama administration is trying to block a court subpoena request by the Archdiocese of New York as part of its lawsuit challenging the federal contraceptive mandate. The mandate will require most employers to provide health coverage for contraception, including sterilizations and abortifacient drugs. The administration is arguing that subpoenas of the executive branch are typically inappropriate and that it would be burdensome to comply with the subpoena. And Annette Funicello, who became a star as a Mouseketeer on the Mickey Mouse Club in the 1950s, died in Bakersfield, California, following a long battle with multiple sclerosis. She was 70. Walt Disney first spotted her at a dance recital, and she soon became the most popular Mouseketeer of all and a Disney icon. She went on to a successful singing career, and during the 60s teamed up with Frankie Avalon for a string of 60s beach movies. Throughout her career, she maintained her wholesome image. Funicello spoke openly about her Catholic faith after being diagnosed with MS. In 1992, she said her sufferings made her appreciate the Lord even more because things could always be worse. I know He will see me through this, she said. May Annette Funicello rest in peace. And Italian daily La Stampa is reporting that Pope Francis is moving ahead with a plan to allow the Italian Bishops' Conference to elect its own president and general secretary. Currently, the top positions of the conference are appointed to a 5-year term by the Pope, as he is the primate of Italy and the Bishop of Rome. The plan would put the conference on par with most other national bishops' conferences around the world. Meanwhile, Pope Francis has appointed Bishop Michael Jacobs to lead the Archdiocese of Dubuque, Iowa. He previously served as Bishop of Wichita, Kansas, and also worked at the Vatican's Congregation for the Doctrine of Faith for nearly a decade. He replaces Archbishop Jerome Hanus, who's retiring due to declining health. And finally, workers are putting finishing touches on what is believed to be the world's tallest statue of Blessed Pope John Paul II. Funded by a private investor, the 45-foot white fiberglass figure will tower over Częstochowa, Poland. The beloved Polish-born pontiff appears smiling, stretching his arms out to the world. On Tuesday, workers put the finishing touches on the statue before the official unveiling on Saturday. When we return, we'll tell you about the largest single religious group being persecuted throughout the world. Nina Shea will update us on international religious freedom and the lack of it, especially for Christians, when the World Over Live continues. Stay right there.
Now, once again, Raymond Arroyo.
Welcome back to The World Over Live. Statistics from sources as varied as the Pew Research Center, Newsweek, The Economist, all conclude that Christians are the most widely persecuted religious group in the world. Yet most Westerners fail to appreciate the extent or the depth of the global scourge. Joining us to explain the crisis is the author of the new book, Persecuted, The Global Assault on Christians, director of the Center for Religious Freedom at the Hudson Institute, Nina Shea. Nina, thanks for being here.
Great to be here again.
Let's start with the statistic here. 130 countries. In 130 countries, Christians are routinely harassed and persecuted for their faith. When you look at this Pew study, it found that Christians were the most persecuted group in the world. This is a group that provides humanitarian assistance to people, schools, hospitals. Why are they being targeted in this way?
Well, they are perceived as the religious other by these other groups. And either it's a remnant communist country like North Korea or China that's doing the persecuting, or an Islamist country like Iran or Saudi Arabia, or a very militantly nationalist country like Burma. So those are the three categories of countries that do the persecution.
Let's talk for a moment about Egypt. This story in Egypt this week is so heartbreaking. I mean, you have the central shrine of the Coptic community there, with a lineage that goes right back to the apostles. And they were literally sieged. They were laid siege to during a funeral for Christians that were killed in sectarian violence. Tell us what happened there and the reaction of the Interior Ministry, which we'll get to in a minute.
Yeah, well, this was just last Sunday, so it's very, very fresh. And there was a funeral, as you said, at the seat of the Coptic Pope. This is a Coptic Orthodox tradition. Sure. And as the funeral was ending, they were besieged by angry Muslims, a mob of angry Muslims who threw grenades and Molotov cocktails and firebombs across, and live ammunition over the cathedral compound walls. They were trapped inside. One was killed, dozens were wounded. And it was ironic, or not ironic, it was particularly tragic because the funeral was for Copts who had been killed in a pogrom against an attack against their village because of a rumor. No one's really sure what the rumor was. Maybe it was graffiti on a mosque wall by some children, but no one's really sure what started it.
The Interior Ministry is saying this on its website. Some mourners violated and vandalized a number of cars, which led to the clashes and fights with the people in the area. Interference to separate the clashing parties is ongoing. So they're blaming the Christians.
Well, of course, there has been no investigation yet, and even the president of Egypt, is now saying, "Well, have to start an investigation." Yeah. But there is eyewitness accounts from both American journalists and British journalists that, in fact, the police were there on the scene. They did nothing to stop it, and in fact, they were lobbing tear gas canisters across the compound wall as well. In fact, joining in with the mob. So the police, there's two failures here. The police do not protect the Christians against the mob, and this is habitual, and many other examples of this. And then the judiciary does not provide any justice.
Now, you were formerly on the U.S. Commission for International Freedom. I want to point this out to you because I know this escaped so many people. John Kerry, our Secretary of State, just went over to Egypt at the end of March, and he released $250 million to the Morsi government because they had instituted all these political reforms. Why aren't human rights and religious rights tied to that aid? And we've got $1 billion promised by the president to Egypt.
An American ship pulled into Port Suez on Sunday, the very day that this massacre took place, with hundreds of thousands of tear gas canisters. Again, another sale, another gift to the Egyptian security forces that they use against their own people and they use against the Christians. It's really, we have to draw a red line. We have to start making conditions on our aid. Our aid has been incredibly generous. It's been a couple billion here, a couple billion there. It adds up to about $10 billion a year for a country that's becoming impoverished. So it means a lot to them, our aid. We need to draw a red line and say Christians have to be protected.
Now, this is certainly nothing out of the ordinary for this audience because we have been covering these stories, and particularly the story of what's been happening in Iraq since the invasion. And when you were on the commission actively and working for the Bush State Department, you were a critic of their policy at the time, warning of what this would do to that Chaldean population. Now, a full two-thirds of that community has scattered. They're gone.
It's a religious cleansing that was going on in Iraq, and we're now seeing this in Syria.
And tell us about some of the cases that are going on in Iran. This Saeed Aberdini. Tell me about that case.
Yes, this is an American pastor. He's an American-Iranian pastor, just been sentenced to 8 years in prison for his Christian beliefs. His name is Abedini. He is sick right now. He's being denied medical care. In fact, he's sick because he has internal bleeding from beatings he received in Evin prison, the worst prison in the world, one of the worst prisons in the world, notorious for its torture. This is an American citizen. Why aren't we speaking up? Why isn't our government? Secretary Kerry did mention him in a statement that came out after hours on a Friday night about 2 weeks ago, never identified him as a Christian, never said that he was on trial for apostasy, for becoming a Christian. And so it really seems half-hearted. We need to be speaking out for these people.
Reading this book, Persecuted, The Global Assault on Christians, has been an eye-opener. Now, I cover this stuff pretty intensely, but the cases you bring to light here, some of them are absolutely
Asia
shocking.
Bibi in Pakistan, she's a mother of 5. She's in prison for blasphemy. She's on death row in Pakistan. Then there's Nadia Muhammad Ali, again in prison for another Islamic crime, that's for apostasy in Egypt. She and her entire family, she and her 7 children have been given a 15-year sentence this year for reconverting to Christianity.
Tell me what you make of the North Korean situation. We are focused anew on North Korea because of its saber-rattling and threats of war. Tell us about the situation for Christians living there. It is
hands down,
a hospitable place.
It's the worst place in the world. If you're caught in possession of a Bible, you can be summarily executed.
Just for possessing?
For possessing a Bible. If you are caught praying, you and 3 generations of your family will be put in detention camp for the rest of your lives. So it's Raymond, we see this over and over again. Look at the countries we're talking about: Iran, North Korea, Pakistan. These are the countries that we have the worst security problems with. They seem to go together. In fact, there's a correlation that's been demonstrated by Pew. You mentioned that in the outset, between religious freedom, or the lack thereof, and instability and threats to our security.
Remarkable. Let's talk about this story. It emerged just this week. The Army classifying as extremists Christians, Catholics, evangelical Christians. Are you concerned about that classification?
Well, obviously it's outrageous. I want to get all the facts. I'm not sure. I think that the Army did host this a PowerPoint that said that. I'm not sure who put the PowerPoint together, but that whoever did that should not be invited to give any more lectures to the Army, because that's totally outrageous.
Just to wrap up, Atlantic Magazine recently told Kirsten Powers, the Jeffrey Goldberg over there, that he is shocked that Christians are not more vocal about this, and, quote, that they're not protesting outside of embassies. Why aren't they?
Yeah, well, Jeffrey Goldberg has been a friend on this issue, of course. I think it's political correctness. I think that the American people have internalized the sense that we should not be insulting other cultures. It's misguided multiculturalism. And, you know, to help with this, we have established a new website called persecutionreport.org.
And what can you find there?
Yeah, it's an aggregator, and it links to all the top stories on persecution each week. So the very biggest stories on persecution are highlighted there. They're all different sources. You mentioned Fides, the Vatican press, but there's also they're there, and all sorts of other
That's a
wonderful
great resource.
Yeah, it's for everybody to use, to become informed, to go back to their church communities, to their families, and try to work on some of these cases, write letters to their members of Congress.
But as you look at the world, Sudan, China, Nigeria. I mean, we didn't even talk about Nigeria. The bombs going off, Boko Haram. We practically report on them every week here. What is at the heart of that? And the use of these blasphemy laws to sideline, marginalize, arrest, and kill Christians.
Yes, well, we're seeing the rise of Islamism. That's a movement to impose Sharia law, Islamic law, throughout these countries where there is a Muslim presence. And of course, Nigeria is only half Muslim.
Right.
The other half is Christian. So there is no tolerance for religious freedom or the religious other. And it's extremely worrisome, and we need to speak out against it and speak for freedom. That's what we stand for as a people. That's part of our heritage as a core principle here. We need to be raising our voices for the people who cannot raise their voices.
Well, Nina Shea, thank you for raising your voice all these years. And the book is Persecuted, The Global Assault on Christians. It's available in bookstores everywhere and online. You should read it. And as Nina said, you can also find out more about religious persecution all over the world by visiting the website persecutionreport.org. Coming up, we'll introduce you to Medal of Honor recipient Father Emil Kapaun, from men who befriended him in a North Korean POW camp. And up next, Rachel Campos Duffy joins us to talk about that mother in Britain who recently wrote that she has one great regret in her life: having her children. Can women really lean in and have it all? That and more from the pop culture when the World Over Live continues. Stay right there.
Now, once again, Raymond Arroyo.
Welcome back to The World Over Live. My next guest is a former cast member of MTV's Real World. She's been a frequent guest host on ABC's The View and currently writes and blogs about parenting and the pop culture for CatholicVote.org and the LIBRE Initiative to talk about motherhood, the sexualization of young people. Welcome back to the program, Rachel Campos Duffy. Welcome back, my friend.
Thanks for having me.
Let's start with this mother in the UK, this Isabel Dutton, who wrote in the Daily Mail, and I'm going to quote this: "My son Stuart was 5 days old when the realization hit me like a physical blow. Having a child had been the biggest mistake of my life." Imagine being Stuart. Even now, 33 years on, I can picture the scene. Stuart was asleep in his crib. He was due to be fed, but hadn't yet woken. I felt completely detached from this alien who had encroached upon my settled married life and changed it irrevocably for the worse. Still, I wish no harm to Stuart and invested every ounce of energy in him. Even so, I know my life would have been much happier and more fulfilled without children. What do you make of this? Why write something like this and enter this into the public discourse regarding motherhood?
I can't for the life of me figure it out, because these poor children have to obviously read this. I don't know. I think that, she feels like if she gets it out there, that there must be millions of other women that think just like her, and that somehow she's going to give them the green light to express this kind of disdain for family, for children. It's disturbing.
There is a big conversation happening, though, out there about mothers and motherhood. And just to be fair to Miss Isabella Dutton, she is taking care of her daughter who has MS.
She is.
But if you read the piece, she's kind of not so happy about that either.
No,
but she's doing it, so God bless her. I hope they patch things up and the daughter doesn't, loathe her after reading the piece in the Daily Mail. Lean In was this book by Sheryl Sandberg, who's the CEO at Yahoo. She's claiming, look, you women who chose to have these families, you exempted yourself from the workforce, you worked all this time, and you've destroyed your careers. you should lean into your career, find your fulfillment there. That's what you're meant to do and created for. You would say what?
Well, I actually wrote a piece about this for Today Moms, the Today website for NBC, and it was called In Defense of Leaning Out, because the truth is, if you're leaning into your career at that level, and God bless her, again, that's her decision. But there is this implication that this is the pinnacle of female achievement, to become the CEO of Facebook.
Right.
If you are leaning into a career to have a career as illustrious as hers, you are leaning out to a lot of things. You are leaning away from your children, from your family, and from friendships, from a lot of things. And so she sort of blames women for this, like, get with it. And I think what she's missing is that a lot of people are doing this as a choice. So she's saying she seems to miss the fact that a lot of young women my age don't believe that idea that you can have it all. And they're choosing to have, I think, the better part, right?
You know, you are echoing something, and I came across this the other day. It didn't get a lot of coverage. Drew Barrymore, the actress, and of course part of the great acting Barrymores, she said, I can't direct right now because I would miss out on my daughter. It was heartbreaking to let it go, but it was a clear choice. I was raised in that generation of women that told us we could have it all, and I don't think you can. I think some things fall off the table. The good news is what does stay on the table is much more important, and it keeps our lives in focus. Pretty good statement. It's
pretty good stuff, but the other thing, the other part of it is this idea of, redefining feminism for yourself. So, I think some women, perhaps like Sandberg, and definitely like sort of the old guard feminists, think that women who stay home with their children are sort of subjugated. There is a choice being made, and I think we're entitled to our own definition of feminism, our own definition of happiness, our own definition of success. It doesn't mean you have to, become, Barbara Walters or Sheryl Sandberg.
I want to play this for you. This is Melissa Harris Perry. Now, she is an MSNBC host, and during one of their ads, which runs in between programming, she said this about children and who really cares for children or should care for children. Take a look.
We have never invested as much in public education as we should have, because we've always had kind of a private notion of children. Your kid is yours and totally your responsibility. We haven't had a very collective notion of these are our children. So part of it is we have to break through our kind of private idea that kids belong to their parents or kids belong to their families, and recognize that kids belong to whole communities. Once it's everybody's responsibility and not just the households, then we start making better investments.
Okay, Rachel, what's wrong with that? Kids belong to the whole community, she says.
You know what I'm seeing here in the culture, and it's actually something we really need to be very wary of and very conscious of, is that government is growing and encroaching on more territory that once belonged to the family. And people like Melissa Harris are actually very big proponents of this. And it happens in very subtle and sometimes very ways that seem very altruistic, even Christian-like. So something as profound as a child whose parents are too poor or too negligent to give them breakfast. So we develop a program at the school for breakfast, and suddenly it grows and grows. And now parents who are very busy and frazzled in the morning, but they used to make breakfast, they used to make that time, are now opting into these government programs. And I would say to you, Raymond, that what's lost is more than the tax money we're spending on that. I think what's lost is something far more precious, and those are those little moments. It's the dignity that comes from making a meal for your child. It's that story about what's happening in school this morning, and it's even that little sticky kiss that you get, after breakfast with your kid thanking you. These are precious family moments, and the more government grows, the more it encroaches on family, the more we're going to lose this sense of what's really beautiful and right in life, kind of like what Drew Barrymore was saying. What's left on the table, they want more and more of it.
Right. And when you hear things like, there's a universal pre-K initiative that is floating around Capitol Hill. The president's proposed, I think it's like $100 billion, is something extraordinary. It's $12,000 a child. And we're talking babies, little kids. Really, from the time they're 3, we're really talking daycare is what you're talking about. From daycare to college, they are not yours. You don't see them. They're fed by the federal government. They're clothed by the federal government. They get phones from the federal government. They're educated by the federal government. And it's not an argument of helping the poor, because obviously we have to do that.
Sure.
That's an obligation.
Absolutely.
And there are various ways of doing that. Certainly the Catholic faith, through the parochial school system, offers scholarships and free education. That
Sure.
is the gold standard, really, for
Absolutely.
education in the U.S. What is the danger of that when it encroaches at such an early age? I mean, it's not only losing precious moments, you're losing the ability to bond with that child and pass your own values, ideals, and hopes onto that child, no?
Absolutely. And remember, in many of these public school systems, and will be another expansion of it, there is a very progressive agenda, oftentimes very anti-Christian, very much against many of the things that we stand for. And I think the solution to it is one that as citizens we need to be vigilant. We need to call out these programs, even the pre-K. I mean, there was a study by the government itself that said it wasn't effective. So we need to be vigilant that way. But also as Christians, we need to sort of fight back by actually doing good and taking care of people, so that the government can't come back and say, well, we're the only ones that can do this for you. So there's a responsibility as Christians. We have to be vigilant about it. But there's definitely, in my opinion, an agenda behind it. It's not as benign as I think they're trying to present it.
There's another thing I'm seeing as you look across the pop culture, and whether it's Victoria's Secret pushing this pink line of underwear, which emblazoned on the rear ends of these underwear are things like Feeling Lucky, Wild. This particular line of underwear is targeted to tweens. We're not talking about adults.
And there's hipsters. They're very revealing. Yes.
Yeah, I mean, there's that. There's not only Victoria's Secret. American Apparel is running into some problems in the UK. They've run afoul of the UK's Advertising Standards Authority, which said, and I can't even show you these ads.
It's child pornography. It's practically kiddie porn.
I mean, yeah, these ads. Really it's a girl in a knit sweater with her legs up, but she's wearing nothing but the knit sweater, and you can see everything else. And they say, this time around, we considered the image to be gratuitous, particularly in an ad for knitwear. And American Apparel says, we're just abiding by the normal rules in the UK. You say what as a mother, and what should parents do? Kids are awash in this stuff.
Well, listen, this is the real war on women. I mean, this is the real war on women. There has been a war on girlhood. And as parents, we need to take it back for our girls. And so there's a cycle here, right? So they're saying, well, we're producing these products because we're reacting to demand in the market. Right. And some parents' excuse is, well, I can't find anything for my 12-year-old besides, panties that say Wild. Not that believable, but there is some truth to the fact that their parents, if parents would stop buying this stuff, we would create a bigger market for things that are more age appropriate. And I'll tell you what, this war isn't really on boys. It's really on our girls. And I'm looking at the feminist movement, and I'm going, what are you people doing? It's all day, all night, birth control and abortion on demand. Where is the protection for girls? What happened to Nancy Drew? What happened to our children aspiring to become world leaders? And Margaret Thatcher just passed away. These are no longer role models for girls. Their role models are Lindsay Lohan. Their role models are all these kind of Disney stars that go bad. Yeah. And I think
not Annette Funicello.
Well,
anybody but Annette. Yeah, no, they've really gone off the deep end.
But I think that the feminist movement is really losing a lot of credibility because they've really sort of abandoned this part of their program. It used to be, the history of it was about protecting women and children from pornography, from this type of thing.
I want to switch gears for a moment in our final minutes. Time magazine had a piece recently, and it kind of touched on immigration in the sense that the name of the article was The Latino Reformation Inside the New Hispanic Churches Transforming Religion in America. And they cited, again, a Pew study. They do such great work at Pew. More than 2/3 of the 52 million plus Latinos currently identify themselves in the U.S. as Catholic. Okay, 2/3. But that number could be halved by 2030. Many of them are considering themselves born again. With the election of Pope Francis, it seems we have a sort of reawakening in the Latino community, a lot of conversions being reported. What are you seeing?
I see that for that trend, the election of Pope Francis is going to be very positive. I know there's an organization I belong to called the the Catholic Alliance or Association of Latino Leaders. This has been an absolute, shot in the arm, boost for all of us. And I do think that, can you imagine a visit to Pope Francis here to the Americas, to the United States of America? I think that he is going to be able to speak to Hispanics, Americans, and all of Latin America in a way that we've just never seen before. Yeah.
No, it's amazing watching the simplicity and
It'll be interesting to see this. It will be interesting to see these figures.
If these numbers pan out.
if they pan out.
Yeah, Rachel Campos Duffy, thank you for being here.
Thank you.
You can always find Rachel's work on the Today Show website. She blogs regularly for Today Show. And for more information on the LIBRE Initiative, you can go to libreinitiative.com. Coming up, he was a soldier, and he was awarded the nation's highest honor today. Father Emil Kapaun exemplified sacrificial concern for others. Roy Wenzel, Mike Dow, and Bob Wood will introduce you to the heroic chaplain, Father Emil Kapaun, when The World Over Live continues. Stay right there.
I'm told that in their darkest hours in the camp, in that valley, these men turned to psalm. As we prepare for the presentation of the Medal of Honor to Father Kapaun's nephew Ray, I want to leave you with the words of that psalm, which sustained these men all those years ago. Even though I walk in the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod. This is an amazing story. Father Kapaun has been called a shepherd in combat boots. His fellow soldiers who felt his grace and his mercy called him a saint, a blessing from God. Today we bestow another title on him, recipient of our nation's highest military decoration, the Medal of Honor.
Welcome back to The World Over Live. In our final segment, a true American hero, Father Emil Kapaun. He was a humble priest, a soldier, and an army chaplain in World War II and Korea. As you saw there, on April 11th, the chaplain posthumously received the Congressional Medal of Honor from President Obama at the White House. Father Kapaun died as a prisoner of war in North Korea, and for the past 60 years, his story has been told and retold by some of the men joining me this evening who suffered with him in that POW camp. He was declared a servant of God by the Vatican in 1993. Joining me this evening are three men who are intimately involved in Father Kapaun's story. Mike Dow is a Korean War vet and one of the few remaining POWs who served with him. Bob Wood is a Silver Star recipient and also a POW and was in the original battalion with Father Kapaun. And Roy Wenzel is a reporter and author of the new book, The Miracle of Father Kapaun. Gentlemen, thank you all for being here. Bob and Mike, I want to start with you all. You really kept this story alive for so long. This has been a 60-year journey. And I know, Mike, you drafted the first piece for the Saturday Evening Post in, what, 1954?
That was right.
About Father?
54.
Why did it take this long? I know a number of congressmen wanted to get this Medal of Honor to Father Kapaun. They were all smacked down. Why now?
Well, when I came back, I happened to be put in the hospital with General Dean and was trying to put together the write-ups that were lost in the war, and one of them we wrote up Father Kapaun, recommendation for CMH. But at that time, they didn't know whether it was, and still don't know, I don't think, whether it was regulation or policy, but they didn't want to make any awards for actions that were conducted in prison camp as opposed to the battlefield.
But Bob, he certainly had a record on the battlefield. There was that great story of him running out into open fire to collect the wounded, yes?
Oh, he was extremely brave under fire. I remember the first time I was ever under fire was with Father Kapaun, and they'd asked for renewed ammunition at a position near us. So I'm carrying the ammunition, and all of a sudden here's Father Kapaun, loaded with bandoliers, etc. I said, "What are you doing, Father?" He says, "I'm going with you, son." So we started up the hill, and Father Kapaun's got a pipe in his mouth, clutched in his mouth. We got fired on, and we both took, the only cover we had was a ditch alongside of the trail. And I looked back, and Father Kapaun only has the stem in his pipe. It had been shot out.
Oh my gosh.
So I said, "You want to go on, Father?" And he said, "Go on, son, go on." And that was his typical behavior. All through this time, he lost a Jeep to mine, and he got a bicycle. And so he's riding by himself out there and all this.
To minister to the troops and
whenever he'd hear firing, he'd head with the bicycle towards the firing. And we'd see him riding through with this rickety old bicycle. We'd say, "There goes Father Kapaun to the sound of the guns." And he was marvelous in that regard. He had great courage.
Mike Dow, tell me how you first met him, because you were not part of this battalion that Bob was a part of.
No, but they put, what happened is they put the survivors of a perimeter that was set up in the first cav in this, they came to the schoolhouse that we were put in when we were captured. In that perimeter, volunteering to stay behind was Father Kapaun, taking care of the wounded there. He and a doctor, Doc Clarence Anderson. And so he hitched up with us that night in that schoolhouse. I didn't meet him that night, but Chinese were doing everything to break down the leadership and telling the GIs you don't have to pay any attention to your officers. And so really leadership then became a matter of example, and it was a genuine test of leadership. There was this one guy, I didn't realize who he was till a few days later, who really kept pushing the people to carry their wounded. If they didn't carry them, they dropped back behind. A Chinaman would drop back, and you'd hear a shot, and that person would never be seen again. So it was really critical to keep them going. Well, this person that was pushing and leading by example turned out later to be Father Kapaun. And it was later on when I was carrying a stretcher. I was on the front end and just wondering who was on the back, and I said, "I'm Mike Dow, who are you?" He said, "I'm Capon." And I said, "Oh, Father, I've heard of you." He said, "Well, don't tell my bishop."
Keep it to yourself. I want to play this bite, and then I want you, Rob, to respond to this. This is Herb Miller. He also is a POW vet. He was one of the men that Father Kapaun carried in this march as they went up to North Korea to this prison camp. Give a listen.
One of them come up. He stood over me with a gun pointed between my eyes. He's going to shoot me. About that time, this soldier come across the road, American, kind of tall and slender. I didn't know who he was. He come over there. He pushed that guy aside and pushed his rifle aside. And why that man never shot him, I'll never know. I think the Lord sent him over there to pick me up to keep from getting shot. I've seen a lot of people in my time. I've been on both sides of the world and everything. I never seen anybody like him. You can't find anybody like him. They evidently don't make them anymore.
Roy Wenzel, I'm sure you've heard stories like that a lot in doing this book, working on this book.
Well, I heard, I interviewed Herb, I interviewed these two guys. It's a pretty amazing story, and in the beginning, it's really hard to believe, because one of the first things I heard was that, well, we need to do this story about this guy who saved hundreds of lives, and how is that even possible? Hundreds. So you have to be a skeptic, you have to evaluate this, and you don't want to fall for a fishtail. But the more I heard these these guys talk, they not only said, yeah, he did that, but they explained how. And it was this incredible combination of the kind of leadership by example that Mike was talking about a minute ago. It was the daring that Bob was talking about. But it was also this kind of, he had already ingratiated himself with the troops in that regiment because he was the guy who was always helping everybody. And then when everything was breaking down and they're being dragged off to prison, and the guys would follow him where they were getting tired of doing what their officers were saying. They were cold and hungry, but this was the guy that they had seen racing around with bullets flying at him, saving people. So the other thing that was just this incredible, he was a farm kid, he was very good with his hands, and in the prison camp that became very critical, as Mike can tell you, because he could make cooking pots out of shredded tin. Mike told us a great story about the water buckets were leaky. He melted down some old rubber and made a patch.
Now, Mike, they used to call him the good thief in the camp. Why?
Well, you know, we had these ration runs, and you had millet and cracked corn to live on, and very limited rations. Not enough to really keep people alive, particularly with our kind of digestion capability of these kind of things. So he would attach on to ration runs, and we'd create a little disturbance. He'd sneak in the back, steal a bag of this cracked corn or millet, and then he would use that to distribute to wounded and other people. So we began to call him the Great Thief because he would steal the rations, and he would teach people to share them rather than to just hoard them for themselves.
Well, as Roy alluded to, he became really a leader in the camp. I was stunned to read in your book he would get Catholic and Protestant guys to recite the Rosary. How did that happen?
Well, in the evening, he'd come around to each one of the houses that were filled with the prisoners, and even though he had a very bad leg and was walking with a crutch, he'd kneel down outside, and here Catholic, Jews, and Protestants were out there saying the Rosary with Father Kapaun. I'm not Catholic, and I learned the Rosary because he was a moral leader to our whole existence. He was the great hope, white hope of our community. Yeah. He was always trying to raise our morale, tell us the war would be over eventually.
In 1951, you get word in the camp that he is on his way to what they called the hospital, which was really, you all knew, to be the last stop. First, in our last 2 minutes, tell me your reaction, Mike, and then Bob, I know you carried him up to the hospital. We'll talk about that.
One of 6.
Go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, it was pretty bad because he had begun to recover, and they were afraid of him recovering is what the problem was, because he represented a spirit that they didn't know how to cope with, one that they were completely afraid of, we'd learned, because they'd turned him back unharmed when they'd taken him away. And so when they came that time with bayonets and forced the POWs around him to let him go, and Father even said, don't put up resistance.
Because you did. You and some
a lot
others.
of them put up resistance. And he just said, well, don't on my account. I'm going where I always wanted to go, and when I get there, I'll be saying a prayer for all of you.
Bob, what was running through your mind as you carried him up to this hospital? I guess they recruited you to do that.
Well, it's just terrible sadness out of losing this best of us, but also wondering in my mind, my God, if they're taking this man, what do we have in store for us? So a certain amount of self-interest was involved. Yeah. But what really touched me was he's blessing the Chinese. Now they're taking him to his death.
Wow.
And he's, forgive them, O Lord, for they know not what they do. And that really got me in tears.
Roy, what is his lasting legacy? And he's on his way to sainthood.
Well, most of the guys that I talked with are Protestant or something else. They're not Catholic, and yet they all came out of that camp telling people and telling me, look, he took care of us. And so a lot of the guys who have really tried hard to tell this story are not Catholic, they're Protestant, but they were so overawed by this man that they wanted to tell the story.
Well, thank you for your work. And gentlemen, I want to thank both of you for your service, particularly with this renewed interest in Korea. You all were so brave under terrible circumstances, and thank you for keeping the story alive.
Right.
God bless you all. The Miracle of Father Kapaun by Roy Wenzel is available from the EWTN Religious Catalog and at bookstores everywhere from Ignatius Press. Before we go, April 20th will mark the 90th birthday of dear Mother Angelica. To commemorate the occasion, my publisher and I are giving away 90 copies of my biography of Mother throughout the month. Now, to qualify, go to the top of my webpage, RaymondArroyo.com, and click on the Happy 90th Birthday Mother Angelica banner. The entire Mother Angelica canon of books, I can barely hold them all, are available from the EWTN Religious Catalog and online and at bookstores everywhere. Additionally, I'm giving away the audio version of the biography. To get one of those, send me an email telling me how Mother has changed your life or the life of someone you know. Put Mother Angelica in the subject line and send it to Raymond at RaymondArroyo.com. Keep it pithy, and I may read a few letters on air next week and share the best ones with Mother and the nuns. That's all the time we have. The show continues on Facebook and Twitter. Go to RaymondArroyo.com. The Twitter and Facebook pages are linked on the left-hand side of the site, and you can sign up for my weekly e-blasts on the website as well. I'll keep you updated on the latest news as it breaks. Next week, our special tribute to Mother and much more. In the meantime, we'll be scouting the world over for all that is seen and unseen. On behalf of the staff and crew of EWTN News, I'm Raymond Arroyo. We'll see you next time. Bye now.